Together. I'm Josh Rivers. I'm the creator and host of the award-winning podcast, Busy Being Black, which explores how we live in the fullness of our queer Black lives. And I'm delighted to convene a conversation today in celebration of Black History Month about our Black history and our experiences personally and in the workspace. I'm joined today by Anthony Francis, Akira Mackey, and Larissa O'Neill. Larissa O'Neill, she, her, is Director of Learning and Development at Allied Electronics and Automation, and her work involves aligning organizational culture, leadership behaviors, and employee performance to promote long-term success. Akira Mackey, she, her, is an award-winning diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, and she currently works at V Senior Living, where she helps create a more inclusive workspace for senior living employees. And Anthony Francis, he, him, is Senior Manager, Group Transformation at Lloyds Banking. He's passionate about inclusion and diversity and leads a number of key initiatives within Lloyds Banking, where he is the role model and intersectionality lead for the group's LGBT plus network. So we've got some powerhouse Blacks in the house. Thank you all for being here and for making time for this Black History Month conversation. On Busy Being Black, I open all of my conversations with the same question. How is your heart? I'm going to start with Akira. How's your heart?
My heart is really full today. I have just rejoined an organization to work with children who are underserved in the Chicago area and doing tutoring, and just seeing, their joy for learning has really made my heart really full this past week. So my heart's full.
Amazing. Larissa, how's your heart?
My heart is tired. I've been feeling like I'm just kind of running on the proverbial hamster wheel, and I know things are getting done. I know progress is being made, but it always feels like there's just more coming. And so I would say, like, the franticness, the constant, has just made my heart tired right now.
I want us to hold space for that, so we'll definitely come back to that. And Anthony, how's your heart?
Yeah, my heart is feeling good. My heart is feeling blessed, I think. Over the past week or so, I've been reflecting on the past 18 months and how wild they've been. But personally, I've been really fortunate that my family have been okay, I've been okay, and I think I'm just really, taking it on board recently because a few of my friends sort of aren't in that situation. So my heart is feeling blessed, I would say.
I love that. And it creates a really nice link between great gratitude, gratefulness, feeling blessed, acknowledging that, but also acknowledging the tiredness that Larissa speaks to. And I want us to hold a little space for that because we're in Black History Month. And I think my experience in Black History Month has often been that we are more busy, right? I think that we should be able to take Black History Month off. Personally, I think that we should get 30 days to ourselves. And so there's this kind of constant pressure on Black people in the workspace to show up. And we don't often have that space to be tired. So I really appreciate you, Larissa, bringing that to our conversation today.
Thank you.
So as Black people, we often have to field questions about racism, discrimination, trauma. And so I would like to avoid those narratives in this conversation if we can. Joy, tenderness, and vulnerability are also very important parts of our lives and questions that we don't get asked a lot about. So what is bringing each of you joy? And a follow-up to that is how you're creating space to pursue things and people who perhaps light you up. Larissa, how are you navigating that? How are you navigating your tiredness and also kind of creating some space around you for joy?
It's funny because I think it's the great conundrum. The things that bring me joy are also the things that I am certain are contributing to the exhaustion and that tiredness that I'm feeling. Because what brings me joy is showing up for others. It's cooking. It's watching my kids flourish in the multitude of after-school activities that they're participating in. It's being a friend, a partner, and that all brings me joy. And I'm very committed to ensuring that I continue to do that, and I be that person in the different spheres of my life. But full disclosure, full transparency, it is a key contributor to also where that tiredness, where that exhaustion comes from, because it's that constant fulfillment of others' cups and not always doing a really great job of remembering to take the time to fill my own.
So what do you do for you then? What do you do to fill your cup?
I go outside. Being in nature, being in fresh air is something that just revitalizes my spirit. I read. I find water. I've always kind of had a connection to lakes, ponds, rivers, waterfalls. Doesn't matter. Like, just hearing water, seeing it is just fills my soul. So yeah, I think those are kind of the key things that when I do remember, that always put a smile on my face.
Thank you, Larissa. Akira, what about for you? How are you creating space for joy in your life?
This is the great struggle for me. I think oftentimes when you're in this work and in this space, you see so much need that you just constantly give. I definitely titled myself a giver. You constantly want to see the work progress and you want it to move at a certain pace. And so for that to happen, you constantly have to be pushing the pace, constantly have to be pushing out content and work and policy. And I think for me, that makes me extremely tired, but it's also what I love to do. So Larissa, shout out to you for the great conundrum. It's very true. However, some new practices that I think, my therapist is teaching me, shout out to anyone who's seeking help and trying to also, engage others in that process of self-healing, is I turn my phone off and I just kind of sit by myself for an hour a day. I know it's so hard. Everybody's like, I have kids and I have work. And what if someone, that's exactly why you should do it. You should just try to take a moment for yourself. It doesn't have to be an hour. It can be 30 minutes. You can tell people, like, I'm going to be unplugged for 30 minutes. I just need to sit. And like during that time, I try to read. I try not to look at like TV and things like that, play with my dog, just really take a moment to see that there is light inside of you. Remember the reasons that you're doing the work, that you're doing what you're doing, but also I think when you turn yourself off from the world and the internet and everything, you start to remember those little things that you like to do, like make hummus from scratch. That's something I did last week. It was just random. I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna do this, and it's just do the little things for yourself. The self-care, I think, it's the light inside of you, because you're taking care of yourself, and nobody knows you better than you, or should know you better than you. So that's what I do to like bring myself joy. I just unplug for a little while, and whatever comes out during that time, it's usually the things that bring me joy. So
I appreciate that approach to that question as well. That sometimes I think all of us could do with a bit of permission, right? Or could do with a bit of someone else telling us to, lay down your tools. Anthony, for you, how are you creating space to pursue people, things that bring you joy, that light you up?
Yeah, I guess actually for me it's a little bit different because I have a day job that I focus on, and then the inclusion diversity aspects that we've just been hearing about comes as a side of desk activity. It's kind of like an extracurriculum thing. So for me, that although you see all the challenges there, actually that itself brings me joy. So we had a really active Pride season here at Lloyd's, and then also as part of Black History Month, there's something every day, and seeing the engagement with it's actually it brings me joy, and it fills me with delight actually. But for me, the one thing that always guarantees bring me joy is my family. I have 3 wonderful sisters, a brother, and my mom and my dad, and I'm very fortunate to still have my 2 nans and my granddad alive. So they bring me joy, and whether it's the WhatsApp group, and we kind of just yesterday actually, just having some pants in there, and actually last night I spoke to both my grandparents, and yeah, they just they bring me joy. So I think that. And then the final thing is actually, I think, since the pandemic, one thing that I wanted to make time for was exercise. Whereas before I wanted to be slim, rather now I want to be healthy on the inside. So I've started going to, I don't know if anyone knows Barry's boot camp, but I've been going for numbers, but I've ramped it up and I go far more often now. And leaving that in the morning fills me with joy. And I think there I've had to some classes I like to go a little bit later. So I've had to learn to be okay starting work later and not be worried someone's not going to think, I'm not working or whatever it may be. But yeah, they're the things that are filling me with delight at the moment, I guess, or filling me with joy, Josh, at the moment.
Amazing. These are all beautiful approaches to joy making, which I think speaks to the diversity of our lived experiences, right? I'm interested from each of you to hear about someone who has transformed your way of thinking or your approach to the world. Across the world, Black people continue to transform and shape the world in really meaningful ways. And part of that work that they do is they show us what is possible for ourselves and for others. Is there someone that comes to mind who has helped you along in your personal or professional journeys, someone who showed you your potential? Let's start with you, Anthony.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I mean, it's probably a bit of a cliche, right? But it's cliche for a reason, I guess. I'd say personally it's my dad, because one of the things that my dad taught me was how you engage and interact with people can really make a difference with how they see and engage with you. So my dad is a big Black man, and some people might find him a bit scary, right? Especially when we live in this sort of mostly white area. But actually, the way he engages and sort of has that emotional intelligence with people, that was something that I learned quite early on, as a key thing to help me in my sort of professional and personal life. I think from a professional side of things, I work at Lloyds. I've been here for 7 years, and there have been different Black people that have reached out along sort of my own professional journey that have all each shared a little aspect about them that's really encouraged me, whether it's my friend Yvonne, who comes from Birmingham and has a gay brother actually, and she reached out and we have a conversation, and I hear things from her in terms of how great it is now to see Black people being able to progress, or whether it be that fills me with sort of inspiration and motivation to kind of to progress and keep going. So there's just a few examples from me, Josh.
And Larissa, for you, does anyone spring to mind? Someone who's helped you along? Oh, go on. I was going to repeat the question, but I don't think you need it.
Sorry. My grandmother, in terms of my personal life, she exact opposite from Anthony. She was like a 4'0", just Black Spitfire woman my whole life, who didn't take anything from anybody. She didn't care who she stood up to. She was so convicted in what she stood for, even if she was wrong, even if we knew she was wrong and we were able to build a really solid case that what she was fighting for and promoting was not right. She just really had her strength of self, and so much of that inner drive that like you couldn't be around that and not kind of get that spirit of strength and empowerment that she was just exuding. Personal or professionally, I really struggled to try and identify a single individual. It's funny, Anthony, you said it's a cliche, but a cliche for a reason. I was going to say the same thing, because I think in that regard, I'm really kind of it takes a village. Like I can think of different figures all the way back to like my 3rd grade teacher who challenged creativity and wanted me to break out of the box that she saw me every once in a while kind of falling back into. College professors who pushed me. My husband, several bosses who told me that I have a voice and I should be more controversial and not be afraid to challenge the status quo, that I have a platform and it's okay to rock the boat. So yeah, I can kind of look at several different people throughout my life, my personal life, who have been there and pushed me and wouldn't let me rest on my laurels or wouldn't let me get comfortable, but with the best of intentions and for the best of reasons, just knew that I was capable of doing more.
Akira, before we come to you, I'd just like to encourage the participants or the viewers, the words just escaped my mind, to use the Q&A function if you have questions that you'd like to ask the panelists and Jen or someone at My G Work will help sort through those towards the end of our conversation. Akira, does someone come to mind for you who has helped inspire you or shown you what is possible for yourself?
Definitely. The person that comes to mind is my first supervisor. I guess she was my second supervisor in a professional setting. So once I had entered an office job and started, really working towards my career, I kind of had let people put on me what I was going to be. I was only looking at community involvement positions, and that's really where I saw the cap, maybe director of community involvement. I didn't really look outside of being able to work with community, definitely not director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, that was not a job that I actually saw myself in. And I know a lot of Black people hear that the old adage, do as I say and not as I do. She was the first person who flipped it. Do as I do and not, do as I do and not as I say. She really showed me how to do it. So when she got promoted, she brought me with her. And that's how I got into the diversity space. She became the director of DEI, and I followed suit as the assistant. And, she took me to every meeting. She, took me into spaces that people were really kind of questioning her authority for me to even be there, to show me how to do the work. And she believed in me, and she gave me tough love when I needed it. And I think we always talk about the importance of children having, a teacher that looks like them in their early childhood development years. Typically that first 6 to 7 years, they should have at least one teacher who kind of resembles who they look like, so that they can see themselves, in different professions, but also, really know that these things are attainable. And I challenge the narrative and say that you also need that as a professional. You really do need to see someone who's in your space or has a similar experience, whether that's inherent diversity or abstract diversity or whatever you're looking for, to match. And I think my mentor really pushed me, and seeing her do the work really, it had a profound effect on me. And she also taught me how to fight for a pay raise and to advocate for myself. And I think it's easy for people who don't necessarily look and feel like us as Black people to say, that's easy stuff. Of course your mentor taught you that, but to see another Black woman fight for her pay and her work, and one to tell me never to work for free, really changed my life, because I probably would still be working for pennies on the dollar because I thought that my work wasn't valuable. And so, yeah, she always comes to mind when people ask me, who really pushed you in a trajectory. She really did sit down and make sure that she paid it forward, so to speak.
I asked this question because I think we're so used to, and luckily, right, so many of our elders or ancestors have done tremendous work. And as their names and their work continue to be recognized more and more, what we often miss are these really individual, personal impacts that we have in our lives. And I think it's beautiful to uncover those too, right? That not everyone is a world-changing activist, but actually these people who see us and push us for more can have a tremendous impact on our lives. Anthony, I'm going to skip around to questions, so I hope you guys aren't wedded to the conversation outline. It's no surprise to any of us watching that diversity and inclusion initiatives are often dominated by white people of goodwill. What have you learned over the course of your professional life about working alongside those who can sometimes be part of the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I smile when you say that, because not to offend anyone who works in inclusion and diversity, but I always think of white middle class women, because there's loads of them. Right? My other half, he works in inclusion and diversity, and literally 98% of people sort of would fit into that category, right? So it's quite nice on this call because it's different. I think, firstly, until late, I would probably say, where we've been into the conversation about race, when it's been really in our faces and a lot more visible, which is obviously very positive. Those people haven't realised, I would say, that they're part of the problem, I would think, because they're so sort of, fighting for the cause, and they're like, actually, no, we're going to do this, and actually they're kind of being a bit blind to that. So I think of late they are now sort of, noticing that, and you've seen IND teams, including diversity teams, become much more diverse and stuff like that. But I think because they are engaged in it and understand the thoughts, I think actually they're much more willing to be part of the conversation as well. So, for example, we as Black people, as gay people, as Black and gay people kind of have to be brave enough to call them out and to actually advise them how they can be better. For example, my boyfriend, who is a white gay man, he is hiring for his team inclusion diversity, and then I actually thought someone immediately who is another white gay man, when actually the point I made to him, actually what you probably want is a Black female to join the team, because you kind of, not only do you have to practice what you preach from the outside, but actually you want the diversity of thought, right? You want everything that comes with that, you want that too. But it kind of takes us to call that out a little bit. So I think that working alongside them, I've noticed that not everyone realises they are part of the problem, but they are open to the discussion of how they themselves can be better too, because I think they're trying to be, but they're just a bit blind to it, I would say. Or they have been blind to it, Josh, I would say. Because I think they're definitely on a bit of a journey too.
Yeah, we're all on journeys, right? There's this assumption that Black people come out of the womb fully formed, right? And that we also don't have to do a great deal of learning and educating ourselves. This links nicely to my next question, actually, for both Akira and Larissa. Obviously, women of color. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you come up against, and what advice you might have for other women of color? So sorry, that's my slide. And what advice you might have for other women of color about navigating work environments and sectors like DE&I that might often be inhospitable to women of color? Let's start with Larissa.
Sure. I would say probably the key challenge for me is just that I am very frequently one of the only, if not the only, women in the room. And then I'm also one of the only, if not the only, Black person in the room. And while, sexual orientation, LGBTQ plus community doesn't necessarily come up as part of the conversation through, comments that are made or just awareness, I also kind of know that I'm one of the only, if not the only, person that identifies as LGBTQ plus in the room as well. So, I know when we first talked, I said I'm kind of like this intersectional hub of radiating energy anytime I walk into a space, and that's a challenge. I mean, it's like putting on a suit of armor every time I sit down, feeling like I need to be on the defensive, just prepared for battle, just in case I'm not going to have a voice, or just in case I'm going to have to fight harder to have my ideas heard or to advocate for what I want to see move forward. And so I would say that's probably the key challenge that I identify and experience. And the recommendation, the pearl of wisdom that I would throw out there is find your tribe, find your cheerleaders, lean on them, go to them, allow them to give you the space for that sense check when you need it, to say, am I being is this what you would have heard in this situation? Like, this is how I took it. Like, am I just reading too much into it? Or like, do I need to take this further? And find those people who, when you need somebody to amplify your voice, are going to stand beside you and push you onto your platform and, be that grounding for you. It's so important for you to be the voice and for you to continue to advocate for yourself, as Akira said, but to know that you have your tribe, you have your community there with you, no matter who they are. And sometimes it's going to be a single person, and that's still okay. It takes one, and that's where it starts.
Yeah, you've actually said something that curveball, authenticity, putting your armor on, right? And this links to something Anthony was talking about earlier, like sometimes we have to be brave enough to speak up, but sometimes isn't part of the, and I'm just putting this to you as a group, sometimes isn't part of the issue that these spaces that we work in aren't safe or brave spaces for Black people and people of color. So what might prevent someone from speaking up is, to your point, Larissa, being the only person of color in the room, being the only woman in the room, being the only queer person in the room, and feeling like you're carrying that on your back. Akira, do you have something to add to that or say?
Yeah, I would say that sometimes this is probably controversial advice, and that's okay because not everything is going to be nice and pretty and packaged, and especially when you're Black in a workspace. But if you have to put on your armor every day to go to work, you are not a soldier. You do not need to be on the battlefield every day. It should not be a battle every day. And you have to look yourself in the eyes and say, do I want to be here? Is there somewhere my talent would work better? Is there people who would appreciate me? When I interviewed for all of these DEI jobs, because I probably interviewed for about 50, I turned a lot of people down because their culture wasn't ready for me to come in. And I'm not here as a soldier. I'm here as your thought leader. I'm here to think with you, lead with you. But what I'm not here to do is fight you on something you said you wanted. Your culture has to be ready. You have to have already sat down and had a DEI conversation. You should have already had bias training because there's so many of us who are consultants who already do this work for companies. If you haven't taken a first step, I'm not coming in to fight with you. So that's the tangent and controversial advice. You should not be fighting every day because it's too mentally draining on you, and you have to ask yourself, how long can I do this? I always think of moms when I think of like people who can't give up, right? Because they have a baby and a child who's going to be a functioning person who depends on them. That company is not your baby. Unless you're actually the CEO, it's not your child. You are not responsible for everything. And that goes into what you asked me. Like, what is my biggest challenge being a woman of color in the DEI space? And it's people challenging me as if I didn't go to school for this, as if I did not have a certification, as if I haven't won awards for this. Like, I oftentimes tell people, I know how to do this work. If you don't take my opinions and my advice and you decide to go in a different direction, that is your choice. I don't have that problem in my current job. They're really, really open, and it's probably the first time in my career that I'm sitting back and going, this could be easy. This doesn't have to be a daily fight. I can just say, I think that this is a great idea and I think this is a bad idea, and people actually have a conversation about it. So people will fight you at every corner sometimes, and I don't think it needs to be that hard. I think sometimes you just have to say, you're not ready for this conversation. We oftentimes talk about, I worked for children for a long time. We always talk about, are children ready to hear this? Maybe fifth grade or fourth grade would be better for certain material. I think it's the same thing for companies. Are you ready for this? DEI is not easy. A lot of these companies come in and think, I'm just gonna, throw some policies out there, give some people some extra days off, and I'm gonna go home. And it's like, no, you are the problem. You actually have to sit down at night and ask yourself why you asked your employee a certain question that bothered them, why that deep conversation hurt so much. And so my advice to women of color is that, a lack of preparation on someone else's end does not necessitate an emergency on yours. You do not have to feel like the sky is burning because someone else did not take your advice or heed your advice. You gave them the tools to be prepared. You gave them the tools to do this in preparation. So when something happens and you had already given advice, done certain, strategic planning, and something comes up and you've already advised someone on that, it is not your emergency. Of course, be there, help your company, but don't go home and internalize it like, oh, I could have done better and I could have said more and pushed harder. You've already done that work. If you show up committed every day and someone doesn't take your advice, that's not your emergency. That's their emergency. And you have to decenter your responsibility at that point. So,
and because
advice.
People who will bear the impact of that lack of preparedness, that lack of readiness to change, will be the very people that these diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are aimed to help. And those are big quotes.
Right? And that's when the work starts. I think sometimes things do happen out of tragedy, and that's not what I'm preaching for. But I think something has to get you ready. It's either going to be you taking the steps on your own, and that's what I like to call proactive companies who like, I'm going to take these steps. Or there's companies like, I hate to say it, but there's a coffee brand that we all know had some pretty controversial times, right? And they did it out of emergency, right? So, go ask your CEO or your president, are we doing this out of preparation, or was there an emergency that necessitated this to happen?
Yeah, sorry, just to come in there, because I found that really interesting actually, Akira. So it's good. It's good insight, and I guess because they work in a company, it maybe like in as in a non-R&D role. I don't know. Maybe my perspective is a bit different, but I feel that everyone everyone goes on a journey, right? So no matter where they are on the journey, whether you be an individual, whether you be an organization, and Akira, you touched on the whether they sort of the internal training or whether it may be. But for me, it's kind of like that is a starting point of someone's journey. And if it's me or someone else, another black person, another gay person, that helps them on that journey, then I think if that's okay too. I think you make a good point though about not having to put your armor on every day, because it shouldn't be a challenge every day, right? It shouldn't feel like you're being attacked and constantly be, pushed back, which I know often in this space can happen. But I think it's working collaboratively, and sometimes a challenge is good as well, because it makes you think differently about things and how you may have approached it. And I'm sure we do things today differently than what we would have done 7 years ago. And I guess it also just stems back to what is driving you in this space. Because for me, there's a quote that I stole from someone or somewhere, which is about be who you needed when you were younger. And I think the visibility, the voice, and all of that comes with that, actually so for me, that is kind of the driving. So sometimes, and I was fortunate enough to be on a call with our new CEO not too long ago, and I kind of said, for me, I don't mind being the person that gets the challenge or the person that someone quizzes, because I'm quite a resilient person, right? Actually, the person I don't want to receive that is someone who is a new joiner, a more junior colleague, who's 18, for example. I'm much older than that now, but that's the person I don't mind actually putting my armor on for those people, so it's quite interesting, because I think it has to have a healthy balance, doesn't it, but it's really interesting actually hearing your thoughts here. It's really insightful, I think.
Yeah,
and if I can
go ahead, Larissa.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to clarify that, Anthony, I think we are on the same page. I'm just saying that there's some people, like you're saying, people come to you, right, and they ask you questions and you answer. Some people don't even ask the question. They've made their assumptions and they're fighting you actively without even asking the question. So I'm talking about the person who hasn't started the journey, right, but yet wants to antagonize you, right? So we have the same thoughts, right? When someone comes to me and they're asking me questions and they need to do that deep diving, great, let's do it. But when you're antagonizing me and challenging me before we've even gotten to the question stage, or you keep doing it day in and day out. I've definitely been in a position where someone's literally asking me the same question every day to try to see if they're going to get a new answer. That's different. So I think you and I are on the same page.
And that speaks specifically, I think, to the way Black women are treated, right, within the workspace more broadly, that your experience, intellect, skills, advice are always questioned as if you don't have the intellect, the skills, the experience, the education. Larissa, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to say thank you, Anthony, for your comment, because I think that really very eloquently sums up what I was getting at. It's not a putting on the armor because I feel like I'm like in battle or like it's a drudgery. It's not that, because you're absolutely right, Akira. If that were the space, then I think there's some of that like self-advocacy and like, is this really the time and the space for me here? It's much more, maybe a mantle is better than saying armor. Like it's knowing that I may be a voice or the voice, and I'm okay with that. Like I'm good being a Black female bisexual that can speak and that others know are willing to speak. And I guess some of that armor is, to what you just said, Josh, it's coming from, a childhood of being questioned. Akira, as you said, like my competency, my education, my background, like, I can still think to experiences very, very early in my career when somebody walked up to me and said, is there a man around that I can speak to? And, that was a pretty regular occurrence. And so I think some of that identification of that armor and that going into battle is, I'm not going to let that be okay. Like I am going to be that voice, and I'm okay being somebody to advocate for that change.
Yeah, and if I may, I want to complicate this armor narrative, right? Because we should be able to put armor on, right? We should, there's this request for authenticity, show up to work as your full self, when actually showing up as our full self to work is probably not appropriate. And so some of us do actually steel ourselves, as in, armor up for the workplace, that we can be the professional version of ourselves that we would like to show in the professional space, versus this kind of admonition all the time to show up as yourself. It might not be appropriate for me to show up as myself, but I'll show up as a professional you've hired. Yeah, so I think we can complicate armor in that way. Gosh, time is flying. Okay, I hope you all have your questions ready. I see some questions coming through on chat. I'd like to remind you to drop them in the Q&A. So if you've written them there, please. And remember that we only see a limited amount of text on the Q&A. I'd like to touch on allyship. My personal experience is that many people look to Black people for advice about how to be good allies, as if we are not also learning how to be allies ourselves. How does each of you practice allyship, and what resources have helped you better understand what it means to show up for other people in the workplace in meaningful ways? I'm going to start with Anthony.
Thanks, Josh. Firstly, just on allyship, because I remember when I first heard the term, just around ally, and it's actually, I didn't realize what it was. But I think for me, I've been on a journey in terms of where I can, provide my allyship to different members of the LGBT plus community. And I actually, so on my Instagram and on my Twitter, I call myself out as a trans ally. And usually if I go to LGBT plus events, I wear a little trans pin badge, because once I went to an event and I met someone who was, say, gender fluid, so in the plus space really, but they spoke to me a little bit about their own experience and so on. And then I found myself just engaging with more trans people and learning a lot about their experiences. And I think when someone speaks up, defends a community that they are not part of, their voice is probably louder, because, well, I'm not just putting my hand up for myself, right? I'm not just championing my own rights. I'm not just championing stuff for myself and lending this to other people, but also I think people are a little bit braver in the conversation that they have with me, because I'm not trans and I can really get into some of the nitty and gritty of it. And also at Lloyd's, we had someone who was quite senior, Kimberly Bird, who is trans, and actually they had loads of traits that I really admired, and I just thought, this is a community that I want to support and amplify. I think to me, what it looks like and how I developed in that space, I don't know if that's the right term to use, was I'm really curious, right? And I'm quite a nosy person, curious, nosy, whichever term we want to use, and I love asking questions. And I also encourage loads of other people to ask questions, to learn more, to really get a good understanding of people's lived experiences. And I think only from that and really understanding where you want to support and really back a certain, place that needs that allyship and needs that support. And I think, allies, for me, one of the biggest things that I can do is speak up, protect, champion trans people when there's no trans person around. So wherever it may be, it's kind of like, I'm not just doing it because someone is stood next to me and I feel like it's an awkward and that's the right thing to be doing. It's, I remember once I was on the bus in Clapham after a night out. It's a well-known gay bar there, and someone was going on holiday to Brazil. And I may have been a little bit tipsy, but I was going on about how actually bad Brazil is for trans people, right? Because I'd been reading about it at the time, and it just fills me with this rage. And I know there's a time and a place. It's not the bus at 3:00 in the morning on the way back from Clapham. But it just, for me, that is kind of, those are the moments where hopefully you make someone else think a little bit, to go and look at something that they didn't know, to learn, so they can join you on sort of that allyship journey. So that's, I guess, a little bit about me and allyship. I guess I kind of diverged a little bit from your question, I think, Josh, but hopefully the point comes across.
What stands out for me is the kind of behind the scenes approach to advocating for other people, because what we see with allyship so often is that I'm going to speak on behalf of a community, but in fact they're perfectly capable of speaking on their own behalf if they have the space to do so. Akira, what about for you? How do you practice allyship, and what resources have helped you understand what it means to show up for other people in the workplace?
Yeah, so I think for me, allyship is recognizing your gaps and doing something about it. It's the action part that I really try to engage in as an ally. currently I'm actually trying to take more trainings to help those with disabilities and those with invisible disabilities. I am learning new ways to introduce myself on Zoom for people who are sight impaired. And I'm learning how to, use Zoom so that I can have subtitles and just like the things like I didn't think about these things. I knew I had a knowledge gap, but, you have to, and I didn't go take a training from someone that, isn't, a part of the community. I went and sought out an organization that is by people who suffer from different disabilities and for them, right? And so that's the way I support them, is by spending my professional development money with those organizations, actually taking the trainings and then implementing them. There's I think a lot of people talk about allyship and they do the first step, which is like, oh, I'm going to support them with my funds, but then they don't go a step further and think about actually taking in the knowledge. And the step further is actually doing something in the action part. And so that's how I engage in allyship. And I try to do it for just about every identity that I know exist, I don't know exist. I just want to learn more so that I can be more supportive and more understanding and, be in community.
So do I have it right that your approach to allyship, which sounds incredible, is support, learn, do?
Exactly. Yeah.
We can all learn from that. And for Larissa, what about you? What's your approach to allyship?
My approach is embracing that idea that I don't know everything and I have space to continue to my own journey. So I'm part of several of our ERGs within my company to support various different communities. And if nothing else, to be there, to attend events like this as an audience member, to hear the lived experiences, to continue to open my eyes to what other individuals experience on a day-to-day basis. I also try to seek out those opportunities to, I guess, be present is the best way to say it, and to just let others know that I'm there. If they have questions, if they need an ally, whether it's through posts on our internal community, LinkedIn posts as well, to just say like, I'm here for you, and it's that constant affirmation of, I want to continue to learn. I want to be there for you. And I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm continually finding out those little things that I've gotten very used to saying or doing or thinking that I've never challenged in myself before. And so that's part of my learning journey, is challenging those kind of preconceived biases and thoughts that I've carried with me my whole life, and really putting myself in a place where I can say, not something I want to carry with me any longer.
I love that. I love the participating in the what's being offered by those communities who are, what we find is so often communities are readily talking about their experiences, what they want, what they require, how people can show up. And so attending these events in the background, again, to link to Anthony's approach as well, I think is so important. We've got about 15 minutes left. And so I'm going to open up for questions from the audience. I have one here from one of the co-founders of My G Work. Oh, very fancy. Adrienne Gobert. What does an ideal workplace culture look like for you? Akira.
Not the question that really stumped me. I think it's so funny. It's just how things come up in life. But I was just talking about doing an ideation meeting for a nonprofit about just like, what does this look like? And I think we don't often, as people of color and like Black people, imagine exactly what we want. It's almost like it's a forbidden thing to be like, this would be great. And so like imagination is super powerful, but sometimes I just want to show up to work in the same clothes that I go outside in. I think a lot of us got that when we went virtual. An ideal workplace for me is just a place where I can just show up. I think a lot of times business culture has been shaped by a certain person or people that look a certain way. And so they're very used to the workplace culture. I think for someone like me, I grew up in Compton and I very much had to learn to speak a certain way and look a certain way and act a certain way. It's really tiring. Like, I don't just go home from work tired because, I've been working for 5 hours or 6 hours or sometimes 8 or 9. It's literally the fact that, I don't always speak a certain way or act a certain way when I'm at home. And so I think it was really interesting when I started doing Zoom meetings and I you can turn the camera off after, you're done and you close your laptop and you do other work. You're not as tired from home. And it's not just because you're not going into the office physically, but it's because when you turn the camera off, you can just be that person listening to music at your desk, having fun, and you're just being yourself. So an ideal workplace for me is just a place where I can just show up and be authentically myself.
Mm. Yeah, I think that I'm wearing sweatpants right now. All I do is put on a jazzy shirt and we're good to go. And it makes a huge difference. I had to put on jeans the other day and I thought, oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever had to do. Larissa, what's an ideal workplace culture for you? You might have it at Allied Electronics and Automation.
Yeah, I'd say ditto to what Akira said. The ability to just be able to show up. It's a space where we don't have to explain why it's important. It's not, it's the same thing as why do we show up to work every day? I mean, it's part of what we do. It's part of who we are. And the ideal culture, diversity, equity, inclusion, it permeates everything that we do. And it's not, a side thought. It's not, oh, wait, did we consider this? It's infiltrated. It's woven into the fabric of how we operate and how we do business. And that is, I think that's the ideal workspace in my mind.
Thank you. Yes. And Anthony, we've got another great question from the audience as well. So Anthony, what's an ideal workplace culture for you?
I think, so ditto to what everyone has said, yeah. When you go final, it's like, gosh, what do I say now? But I think for me, to put it really simply, it'd probably be a place where nobody has to think about being them in order to thrive, I think because actually the point is we change and we alter this because we want to get better and succeed. But actually, in an ideal world, you won't have to think about your accent, your mannerisms, whatever it may be, in order to thrive, right? So I think for me, that would be an ideal culture.
An ideal culture for me is one in which I can wear hot pants all year round. We have another question from the audience. Tom Garrity, I'm so sorry if I pronounced your surname incorrectly. How can we encourage collaboration that brings our intersectionality closer versus being segmented and staying in your lane? He's thinking about organizations with multiple ERGs, for example. So importantly, we should define intersectionality because we know that this is a word that gets used a lot and is not always used correctly. So who wants to take the definition of intersectionality? Akira?
I have so many different ways I use the word in intersectionality, but it's mostly the ability to recognize that someone has multiple identities, but also being able to be in allyship with them as they put together those different identities.
Yeah.
Maybe someone else has a more clear definition, but that's the way that I use it in my work.
Yeah, and intersectionality was, of course, coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the early 80s and speaks to the way social identities overlap and compound on the lives of people. And that in order for us to fully understand what it means to move through the world as a Black woman, as a queer Black woman, we have to understand how she is impacted by societal structures as she moves through the world. What's really interesting to me about Tom's question is this segmented and staying in your lane, which I think often Black people get accused of a lot, creating our own spaces. How do you respond to Tom's question about separate but necessary spaces, if you will? How can we encourage collaboration when separate spaces can sometimes be necessary is part of the question we should ask.
I think just so at Lloyd's, so I picked up the role model lead about 3 years ago at Lloyd's, and it was because often when I went to LGBT plus events, I was the only person of colour in the room. Okay, and I thought, you know what, there must be more people out there that look like me, or even a different shade of colour than me, but they are out there. So let's go and find them. So the purpose of the role models was to showcase diverse role models to attract people. So originally I engaged with the ethnicity network, it's called Reach, to find more Black gay people. And I thought, right, that's great, I'll go and find them in the network. That didn't quite happen. However, by having the conversation, what we did was we really brought Black colleagues who are allies or wanted to learn more to the table. So now naturally, just last week we had an event, and being Black and LGBT was all as part of that event. It just naturally kind of fits into a lot of different things now. And I think really it's about reaching out and finding some of the common things that I guess the discussion points to have the conversation. And here we have different events. And actually, you bring both parties together in the room, and quite naturally, they then grow and bond as one. That's what I've found anyway. So I think really, it's just about finding that common point at first that people can relate to and have a equal discussion on, and then to get the conversation rolling quite naturally from there would be, what we've done here, and it's worked quite well, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And Akira and Larissa, if you don't have a burning response to that question, I might move on to our final questions. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your questions. I'm sorry to miss you, Marius. He's asking about how we see workplace culture in 5 years' time, but this might link to some of the questions that we have still to answer before the session ends. We have 8 minutes. So, what would each of you say to Black professionals who are working within spaces they'd like to help change? What words of wisdom or encouragement might you impart to them? Larissa.
There's always going to be more work to be done. You cannot do it all yourself. You're not going to change it overnight. Take something small, take something within your control, take something that you can influence and start there, and then build on that. And give yourself permission when you need to step away, because like I said at the start, there's always going to be something else. There's always going to be the next challenge. If the last 18 months has taught us anything, it's that there's always going to be something else possible for you to focus on. So don't get discouraged because you don't flip the coin overnight. Celebrate those small wins, find the areas that you can influence and impact, and then just keep building on that.
And find your tribe, as you said earlier.
Find your tribe, absolutely.
Akira, what would you say to Black professionals who are working within spaces that they'd like to help change? Do you have any wisdom or encouragement?
I think I'm going to lean on Larissa's response of start small. I always say start with a conversation. It's just a great place to start. You're not probably, if you feel that way, there's change that needs to be made, which there always is. I would find somebody else that's feeling that same way. Have conversations, and just meet people, where they're at. Just see if you can, find a group of people who are doing the work, or just are feeling like you're feeling. Don't go it alone. That's the best advice I can give you. I've definitely been in spaces where I was the only person fighting, and that's my trauma response of like, I'm not going to work in a place where I constantly have to be in the trenches. It's really too difficult to go it alone. So don't go it alone. Do it together. Do it in community, because it's just, there's going to be days where you want to scream at a wall, and I much rather you have another person to interact with than just screaming in a silo by yourself. And so just find people.
Okay. Anthony, what about you? What words of encouragement or wisdom do you have for Black professionals who want to be part of the change?
I would say don't take no as the final answer. And I think by that I don't mean keep nagging the same person because you want X outcome. I think if you get a no from someone, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to give you a no. And I think it's about finding the person that agrees and wants to champion your thoughts, your ideas, and really push you forward with that. So just because one person has said the no, not everyone will. So that would be my one piece of advice on top of what the others have said.
Lovely. And that's all we have time for today. My advice is obviously to sign up for My G Work, which is a network of LGBT professionals and allies. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Anthony, Akira, and Larissa, for sharing your wisdom, and particularly for sharing what's bringing you joy and how your heart is. I think it's important that we see Black people showing up as themselves, as vulnerable, fulfilling human beings in every space we occupy. So thank you all so much. I'm going to throw it back to the team at My G Work.
Hello, thank you, Josh. I want to thank everybody, all the panelists, Larissa, Anthony, Akira, Josh, for contributing to this wonderful discussion. I know I've learned so much from each of you, so on behalf of My G Work, thank you. It's been amazing to hear from you, your perspectives, your personal stories, and I hope that we've all had the opportunity to learn from one another. Thank you to our attendees. If you want to connect with our panelists, the links to their My G Work profile are available in the chat. I want to encourage everyone to be kind to one another. We are all here on this journey together, and it's great to have the space to connect from different parts of the world and share our experiences. Just a quick reminder that Black History Month discussion will be at 6 p.m. London time with Darkwa, and the link is also available in the chat. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day or rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.